You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello. Playing the cello. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday, and we all know what that means. Time to forget whatever else we were doing in the week and focus on our favorite thing, practicing the cello as much as we can all weekend. But we need to kick it off with something, or we don't need to, but it sure helps. And in my opinion, there's no better way than talking to somebody else about their ideas about cello playing, cello practicing, the repertoire, all these things. This week, it is my distinct pleasure to have as my guest Professor Mark Rudoff of The Ohio State University. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm great, Ben. How are you?
I'm doing very well, too. Say, for our viewers who may not know much about you yet, would you introduce yourself and tell about your musical background as well?
Well, I should introduce myself by starting, we'll say two things. One is I'm a born-again practicer. That I came to practice quite late, and I have a lot of understanding of the situation that younger players are in. And then the second is to explain what passes for my career. I think I'd start in the middle. There's a point where in my 20s, I was playing principal cello in the Calgary Philharmonic, which was terrific job. And I was very successful by any measure. And I was on that path that you know well. I was looking for the next job, and I was at very important auditions. I got to be runner-up for associate principal cello of St. Louis Symphony, and I was runner-up for assistant principal cello of San Francisco Symphony. And I came back from one of these auditions, and one of my colleagues in the orchestra said, "Wow, you're such a good musician. You have to figure out what this runner-up thing is, because you deserve one of those jobs. You just need to focus." And when I look back on that, I realized that was never going to happen. There's too many other things that I'm interested in. So I was never going to be that person who spent 7 hours a day in a practice room with a single purpose of getting a title chair in a major symphony orchestra, because I think everything else is so interesting. And now I embrace that and honor it, which is why I'm a university cello teacher. I grew up in New York. I grew up on Long Island when it was the great hotbed of string playing in the 60s and 70s. I played in youth orchestras with people who, I played in a youth orchestra with all but one of the members of the Emerson Quartet when we were all little kids together. Because There was a time when there were these powerhouse school music programs on Long Island. We would have big Long Island String Festival, and Alexander Schneider would conduct. And from there, I grew up in music camps. I went to Kinhaven and quartet program. I did a Juilliard pre-college program when I was in high school, and then broke it all off and went to Columbia instead of going to conservatory. Decided to take a year off from that and went to Juilliard, but never went back to Columbia. So I finished a bachelor's and master's there. And then, as I said, I decided to get as far as I could from New York, and I won a job playing principal cello in the Calgary Philharmonic, which I did for a number of years, then quite abruptly dropped it. And some of that, which I'll fill in the detail because it may be relevant to the situation that some of your viewers find themselves in. Some of it had to do with personal circumstances. Through those teens and 20s, I also suffered with chronic ulcerative colitis. And at one point in 1984, after years of fighting this, had surgery to remove my colon, which made me healthy for the first time as an adult, and made me aware of that there were bigger possibilities in the world. Dropped it all, went to the Banff Center, and then decided I was done being a cellist, went to law school, graduated with a JD from the University of Saskatchewan, which we think of as the Harvard of Saskatchewan, and then started practicing law in Calgary, thinking I really was done being a cellist. But after I married Nancy 30 years ago almost, started feeling the tug of cello, worked in arts administration for a while, we both did, and then finally resumed full-time life as a cellist with Nancy's inspiration. And what I found was the thing I was most interested in about being a musician was teaching. I hated the music business. I still hate the music business, though I know now how to help my students navigate it. But what I loved was the interaction of teaching, and especially what I had learned about teaching when I was in law school. So I rebuilt a career out of being a college music teacher. First, I taught at University of Saskatchewan as a sessional. I got a full-time position at Brandon University in Manitoba, a heritage music school in Western Canada. Did that for 8 years before we decided to come to Ohio. And since 2008, I've been cello professor at Ohio State University.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you say this passion for teaching. In my viewing of your teaching my own students and your sessions at ASTA, and even when you are presiding, I'm thinking of a session in particular, would you allow me to say that I think it seems you have a passion for music, for sure, and you have a passion for thinking about music, and you have a passion for communicating about music. And I mean, not that all of those aren't components of teaching music, but it's just a little bit more specific. Am I right?
Yeah, so those, everything you described are the things that are central to me. And I greatly honored that what you perceive that as his passion. What it is from my side is a almost endless set of questions that I've been fascinated with, especially since I came back to playing. Mm-hmm. So I believe that the discourse of music is the most interesting part of music. How we engage with a piece of music, which I treat as engaging with text, that can be endlessly satisfying to try to keep investigating what's going on. And that frames a lot of my central preoccupation, one of my central preoccupations, which has always been interpretation. And that side was enriched by what I experienced when I went to law school. And I found out, oh my God, lawyers are wrestling with the same thing. So I'm interested in, say, interpretation as a matter of discourse, that that what you're trying to do. I'm always having many conversations when I'm learning a piece of music, and I'm in that stubborn class of people that I am always learning a piece of music. I was teaching Beethoven Opus 69 Sonata this year, which is the sonata I know the best. I've been playing it since I was 15. I've recorded it. I've performed it with a dozen pianists and coached it with the best people in the world. And I'm still arguing with Beethoven about it. I'm still finding things in it. And then that it's one of my mantras when you're talking about communication is that music is about ideas, not notes. And I will always remind students of that. I'll say that in studio class when I feel like someone a player has become disconnected from the music. They're just stroking, they're just swimming through it. And that's the most important thing for me, is to find the way for a student to make a piece of music their own. So I say many things that are deliberately challenging to them. Or I have answers to their questions that are deliberately open-ended. So one thing, somebody will say, is that the right tempo? And I'll say, I don't know. Should I take time there? I don't know. Why would you want to? And then that also feeds back into how I approach practicing, because I because as I said, I'm a born again practice. Part of for a long time, I didn't really understand what I was trying to do when I practiced, which since returning to the cello that 30 years ago, I've never had that problem. Now I always understand what I'm trying to do, but I'm trying to communicate that endless sense of engagement, curiosity, digging in to my students. What I wait for in a lesson, so a lot of what I do when I teach is I'll focus on a particular chunk of music. And I'm looking for, it's like the handhold in a climbing wall. I'm looking for the way into that. And I'm waiting for that moment where in that intense focus, all of a sudden the student has shut out everything in the room and they are now involved in the piece and they're practicing with absolutely no guidance from me. And at that point I sit back and I watch them catch fire. It might just be a little bit of a fire, but yeah, that's what I've been trying to do.
Yes. Well, okay. So some of your presentations, some of your materials that you have available at your website at The Ohio State include things like how to teach yourself to play the cello, and they address things like critical thinking. And one of the things I like about your materials and your presentations show that it is eminently possible to be analytical and to ask why and to be a critical thinker and still not only not have it be in contradiction to the passionate, the emotional, but instead it fuels the passion. So like for our viewers who are hopefully going to pick up their cello and practice this weekend, if they haven't thought along those lines before, do you have some advice or suggestions as to how to get into that mindset?
So that's a great question. I would have, let me make it down to something, let me break it down to something really concrete. So I have a student this summer who we decided his summer project is he's doing Pezzo Capriccioso. In his case, part of the issue, and they're connected, he's in that class of really gifted players who's used to playing a piece and not being able to play all of it. And I have to convince him that he actually is a good enough cellist that, no, you should be able to play every note of this, and you should be able to play it beautifully and cleanly and musically. And then the thing that's linked to is more repetitions and more mindful repetitions. So one in that teach yourself cello, one of the things that I have, and it may be the only thing that anybody needs, I say, pick one thing. If you find you've been practicing mindlessly you've been playing and not even listening to yourself for 5 minutes, pick one thing that you're going to focus on in this piece. I generally, if you're stuck, I always recommend sound because it deepens your listening. Mm-hmm. So listen to the quality of the beginning of every note in those. I'm thinking now of the opening lyrical section. And think of the quality at the beginning of every note. And then once you have really heard, oh yeah, no, that's not quite the kind of attack that I wanted. Boy, those are really scratchy. And then you start thinking, what's happening with that? Okay, then I said, okay, are you listening through the life of the note? Are you going to listen to how each note connects to the next thing? And if you choose your one thing well, you'll find it's connected to everything in the universe. Another one that I'll often suggest is time. Okay, you're going to focus on pulse, which is actually also a really good thing once you get to the 30-second notes. Um, 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 so owning the sense of pulse, which of course means using the metronome for starters, so that you notice every time that, oh yeah, that didn't really quite line up. And then in the first section saying, okay, where do I want to be flexible about pulse, which might take you into where's your musical imagination. If you can't feel, what you may discover is, whoa, I've had the metronome on and I've never actually heard how my playing lines up to the metronome. I remember I had a student, Andrew was when I first started teaching OSU, and he knocked on my studio. He said, I can't find my metronome. Can I borrow a metronome? So I gave him my old DB88 Dr. Beat, and he charges off. And if for students who've never seen a Dr. Beat, when Dr. Beats first came out, what they were impressive for was they were so loud. And Andrew's back in my studio 10 minutes later, says, oh my God, I just realized I've never actually heard a metronome while I was playing before. But then that might extend to, oh, I don't really know how the time works. And so then you might want to get up, and I always advocate conducting and singing while you play, and conducting and walking around, because it's hard for us to walk around while we play the cello, or it's dangerous. You break a bridge when you bump into a bookcase. And that's a way to engage the imagination. But find something that makes you notice something that you haven't noticed in your playing before. And make it one thing. And it's not, and the other point of pick one thing, make sure it is really one discrete, simple thing. The typical thing that a student will grab onto is, okay, I'm going to work on my intonation because they've been told that's the most important thing. And there are two problems with that, choosing that as your starting point, I would argue. One is that intonation isn't a thing, it's about 24 things. So you could pick one thing about tuning that you want to do. Said, okay, I notice that my sense of pitch is wandering. Oh, well, if you want to really center in the key that you're in, really common problem in the second page of Pezzo Capriccioso, turn on your drone. Get your, I would suggest for, the app that I use, but you want D2, 3, 4, and throw in a little bit of A4 just for a little bit of spice, and really, just so you get a little bit of extra overtone and really play legato, 4 notes to a bow, and really get centered. If that's what you think the issue is, and that's a good place to start. The other problem, so you have to pick the particular thing about tuning that you want to work on. If you want to say that's what my focus is going to be. The other thing, though, about saying I'm going to focus on intonation is that until you acquire some distance and understanding of tuning issues, it's highly stress-inducing to say I'm going to play in tune, because there's that Far Side cartoon about what we say to dogs and what dogs hear, and what a lot of the self-talk that students pick up with from working on intonation is, it's out of tune, it's out of tune, it's out of tune, and then you're not really listening to anything. I have a whole branch of practice that I call intonation without tears, but the fundamental point is, you can't tune if you can't hear, and you can't hear if you're not relaxed. So I rarely suggest that as the first thing out of the box to say, I'm going to work on playing perfectly in tune. There's a whole bunch of others. I'm going to focus on doing the most obscene dynamic changes I can in Tchaikovsky Pezzo Capriccioso. There's a good, easy one that can consume a lot of time and attention. And if you do that one, that will inevitably take you into sound. It'll take you into bow control. I'm going to spend all of my time today, I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes really focused on, am I using the full bow? So pick one thing. That would be my first suggestion for the weekend.
Terrific.
And now I'm going to have to get up and go practice now. I'm really excited.
Okay, two more things. One of them, now I have to say, those of us who do get excited about having a larger block of time to practice, and are those of us who are, really enthusiastic about the cello and its sound and its repertoire, like you and I and a lot of the viewers, sometimes people will call that, say, cello nerd. But there's nothing wrong with a cello nerd. And I can think of few cello nerdier things, and I'm saying this, in the best of light, than the Sautier flow chart. So people will go to your website and they'll click on this. It's something that you kind of have to see to believe, and it takes a while to read through it. But can you give them a little bit about the background of this, and then they'll remember it when they check it out?
Well, let me point out first the whole story behind it, because it relates to the issue that you brought up at the beginning, that being a thoughtful cellist. And I argue strenuously that making the choice between being intellectual or being creative is a false choice, that those things are blended. But then again, I'm a Libra, so I have to be balanced. I have to be Apollo and Dionysius. It's in the stars. A lot of the best, most interesting, most useful stuff I've done is because some student asked me a question and my first thought was, no, you can't do that. And then I immediately say, wait a minute, I'm going to think of a way of doing it. And that was a student that I taught at summer camp that I'd become quite close to. And he was getting ready for college auditions, and he was playing second movement of Elgar Concerto. And he sent me an email and said, I am playing second movement of Elgar Concerto for college auditions, and I realized that I don't know how to play off the string. Could you send me an email explaining it? And my immediate answer was, no, that's crazy. I have to be in the room and I have to show you what it looks like, and I have to see, is your elbow at the right level? I have to do all this stuff. And then this Libra mind kicked in and said, of course you could do it. You should be able to do that. You're smart. And it took me about a month. I got back to Jake and I said, give me a minute. And the spider that is the Sautier flowchart is the way I do all of my stuff. Actually, let me see if I can bring it up here while we talk. But it's my method of choice for how I start any thought project as I do these mind maps. The central thought was, okay, how do you play off the string? And as I played around with it, and some of it was hard for me too, because I had there's a lot about teaching that I believe is, shut up, there we go. Having to explain to somebody else something that you already take for granted and understand that, from your perspective, this is a mystery and I know how to do this, but I don't know how I got there. And I had a wonderful first teacher who gave me a terrific spiccato Sautier set of strokes. So I had to go back and figure out what I was doing. And in doing that, went and found different elements. So some principles, which is one way of thinking, that instead of rules, you have principles. And here's these, this set of principles over here, that this is how you want to gain perspective at it, what you're aiming for at the end, what you want it to feel like. And then there's some little things about how you practice it, very detailed. Look for this, this is what's going to feel like, this is where you are, wrist and fingers, elbow. And um, and then the core principle, which is again always the way I want to think about something, is that we don't make the bow bounce; we create the conditions that allow it to bounce. And it was a great exercise for me to get to do this because I realized how much I had been making what I consider to be the fundamental teaching mistake. Whenever I had taught Sauté up to that point, I had always said, well, just do it like this, which is almost useless teaching and somewhat mindless teaching. And it forced me to get really detailed about it. And then I had to beta test it, and I sent it to Jake. I said, okay, a month ago you asked me, can I teach Sauté and without actually giving a lesson, see if this worked. And it worked for him. And it's worked for not every person, but for most people that I've passed it along to and then have passed it along to other people and then have passed it, because it's actually returned to me. There's something on that page that will help them unlock a way of, as we keep coming back to thinking about Sauté, thinking about what is working when it's working, what is working when it's not working.
Well,
athletes are way better about this
yeah,
than string players are.
in many cases. Well, another thing I like about it is even reading through it, somebody who is already fine with their Sauté or something, it kind of also teaches a way, an approach to thinking in this flow chart and principles that may help them if they're trying to fix something about their vibrato or a particular type of shift or et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great, everybody should check it out. All right.
Recommended mind map as for when you're writing your essays. I mean, or for those of you who've already started writing blogs, but it's a way of getting thoughts out before you edit them, which is also, I think, a phase of practicing.
Yes.
I've been playing with that as a way of, we've been talking about tuning, a way of teaching, conceptualizing intonation. So let me throw this one out to you, Dr. Whitcomb. In professional writing classes or in creative writing classes, they'll often talk about separating the processes of editing and writing, that writing something and editing are two separate things. And where people get blocked up is as they're writing, they're also trying to edit. So that the way to free up your writing is to just write stuff and not care whether it's full sentences or whether the grammar is correct or whether you're using exactly the right word. Then you put it away and then you come back and you edit it. And I have found it useful, this is just in the past couple of months, using that as a way of teaching tuning, that learning the notes and then refining the centers of pitches of the notes are actually two separate processes. You and I have talked about how one of the parts that's gnarly about many of the Popper etudes is that they're quite complex harmonically.
Yeah.
So Popper 22, the one with the pentatonics. It's tricky to get it in the ear and play the right notes. And I had a couple of students working on it, and I said, don't worry about whether or not you're exactly in tune. Get to the right key, learn the handshake. And once you have that done, then you have a framework that you can work on for making sure it's in tune. Because what they were doing in their practice was playing like half of a measure and then stopping to fix the intonation, which meant in the cognitive side that they actually weren't getting anything they could remember. They weren't getting a melodic pattern that would be sticky enough for them to come back to it. And I found that worked. So intonation also is writing, analogously writing. Learn what these notes are. Get your fingering correct. Get your mechanics all right. And then once you have that, you don't have to think of what the notes are, like measures 10 and 11. Can you sing it to yourself in your head? Can you play it on the piano? Once you know what the notes are, then you can start to tune them. And it was pretty successful for them. And they've now carried that idea over to other passages where they hadn't separated, am I playing the right notes from, okay, I'm playing the right notes. And now they are centered the way I want them. That's usually the term that I use, is centered. I never use the word perfect.
Yep. Yep.
Or I charge myself money anytime I use the word perfect. Except for if I say perfect fifth or perfect fourth or perfect octave. And that's merely a technical term, which you would know from your other doctorate.
That's true. So, what do you have coming up, Mark?
Oh, there's. Did I mention that I'm incapable of focus? Did I ever mention that? The most interesting thing I got to work on this year, and it will be in its final form in about a month, but I got a fellowship from Ohio State Office Center for Ethics and Human Values to do a project on the ethics of studio teaching. That it's a course, it's a module. I've designed it as a module that'll go into a larger course on studio pedagogy that I teach for graduate students. But the idea was that, first of all, the studio teaching relationship, the one-on-one relationship, is in many ways separate and special and creates all kinds of opportunities, but also problems for how does the teacher conduct themselves. And then the second part, that everybody who graduates a music degree ends up doing studio teaching, but we as a profession don't have ethical standards, either for ethics writ small, what are professional ethical problems that a lawyer or a doctor would face, but also ethics writ large. How do you conduct yourself in a way that makes you happy as a person and allows you to live a good life as a musician? So that has been, it was really exciting and fun and very challenging to dig in. The way it works is the ethics circle. We had a group of fellows. We had 8 fellows this year, and we had some senior mentors in the philosophy department who run the program. But we had to present our work as it was going along, like a writing group, and say, okay, this is what I've done so far, or this is a problem that I'm having, or here's an idea that I've been playing with. I don't know if it makes sense. So that was the most exciting thing that I did, and in fact, I have a few teachers who've at different schools who've asked me if they can have a copy of it when it's done, which is the next step I want to take it to, because I think it's really important. A lot of what, and I've mentioned that I still hate the music business, but a lot of what I see is shabby behavior, and I know that in some cases that's what students have learned from their own teachers, not from you. Definitely not from Dr. Whitcomb. My quartet wants to resume real live concerts in front of real live people. I have a string quartet called Janus String Quartet. You can find Janus, and the idea is it's Janus, the god who looks forward and backward. And part of the reason we chose that is that 2 of us are old and 2 of us are young. It's actually 2 people. The 2 violinists are wonderful violinists who are active in the community here in Columbus, but they also studied chamber music with me when they were at school. Nice. And then the violist is my wife, Nancy. But then the other part is we want to put music in context by looking at new works and old works. So generally our programming is lining up something new and showing it connection to something old. We're going to do one concert about found music, and we want to use a piece by Adolphus Hailstork that is variations on Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Coleridge Taylor Perkinson's Calvary Quartet, and they both use Baptist spirituals, and then put them together with Razumovsky. We haven't decided whether it's one or two, and how Beethoven found these Russian folk songs or these Russian tunes and incorporated them into his music, and that this is something that composers have always done, and done it this way because anyway, we're going to do another concert with a piano quintet by my friend Karen Sunebacker. This will be in the spring. In fact, I may be talking to you about this because we may be trying to take this on the road if we can get a grant.
Yes.
But Karen Sunebacker, who's a Métis composer from Canada, and you're far enough north that you may know what the Métis people are, but they are the group in Canada where the French voyageurs, the trappers from French Canada, intermarried with different native peoples. And so that's her extraction, and she wrote a piece that uses that and actually has spoken parts in it, a piano quintet. And we're going to pair that with one of the great piano quintets. I think it's going to end up being Dvorak. And then we have one concert that we start our year with. The university does a public domain concert. It's to celebrate works that came into the public domain, and this year's 2021. We've always been linked up with them, and we have 3 astonishing pieces, all of which were a complete revelation to me. And I'm old and I've played a lot of string quartets. One is a piece that we just had to do just because the title was delicious. It's by a composer named Louis Greenberg. You're better educated than I am, so you may have known Louis Greenberg. But the piece is called Four Indiscretions. And then there's the string quartet by Erwin Schulhoff, the Bohemian Jewish composer who died in a concentration camp. And it's this wonderfully experimental, crazy piece. And then a string quartet by Ernest Bloch called Landscapes, Paysage. And they all became public domain works in 2021. And so those line up, and that's a program we'll do in a few places. So I have my quartet, which is my passion project. So I am still playing. And then the last thing is I got a grant a few years ago to do the Cello Lab. And you remember the Cello Lab is my conceit for how I treat my studio, that we're all in the lab together figuring stuff out. But we're doing the Cello Lab practice workbook, which got held up a bit from pandemic, but also kind of grew in pandemic. But the students are inventing a compact resource manual. And the idea is that it kind of deals with that question you asked at the beginning. So what do you want to do this weekend? But the idea is something you could thumb through and find solutions to particular practice problems, or find a way to get launched when you don't have a particular project, or a way to get started when you have that recital that you have to do in a month. But not intended to be a comprehensive book about practicing, but a true workbook that has the basic resources, and then the user can fill it in. And that should be done. The Cello Lab practice workbook actually should get done by the end of fall semester this year. Other than that, I'm not doing anything else.
Right. Well, terrific. Mark, it's always a pleasure talking with you. I know that's just a wealth of things for inspiration for practicing, not just this weekend, but beyond. So thank you so much for sharing all of those ideas.
I can't think of anyone I'd rather talk to about this. So I hope that now that travel is safe and legal, I get to see you face to face this year.
That'd be great. That would be great. And viewers, next week, my guest is Violetta Valerie Muth, professional cellist, wonderful cellist of Ireland. So you won't want to miss that either. And happy practicing in the meantime.